Identity is always weird because people always want to identify me with whatever they think is really interesting. My colleagues at NASA say, "Meet Kasha, she's a stand-up comedian." My stand-up comedian friends say, "Meet Kasha, she works at NASA." I like to introduce myself in a way that combines both of those things that I love. I'm a science comedian. Thank you. I write jokes about science. And I've been doing comedy for a while, and I realized that by combining both of these things, stand-up comedy actually has a lot of qualities that can make science more approachable for people who think it's boring or don't care. How do I know this? Well, I actually analyzed over 500 of my jokes. And it took a long time. I had one volunteer helper, and bless his soul, because not all of my performances were winners, and even I cringed at them. Here's an example of my Excel sheet where I typed in all my jokes and I measured a bunch of different things. Here, apparently, I did a good job at riffing off of someone in the crowd who was German and had black-rimmed glasses, so who knows? One of the things that I measured was how long a premise took to take, and then how many seconds of laughter it produced. I did this to figure out what kind of impact the joke had on the audience. Here are some of my jokes, where you can see the blue is a premise, and the orange is the seconds of laughter. I also categorized my jokes as science or not science, and it turns out that only a quarter of my jokes are science jokes. But this small percentage actually had the biggest impact out of all of my jokes. If you looked at my jokes overall, my science jokes actually performed 40% better than my non-science jokes. And this held true no matter where the joke was in the set. Here, I separated my performance into quarters. So whether it was the first quarter or the fourth quarter, my science joke did better. And I wanted to know why. Why did the audience respond so much to my science jokes? In my experience, people aren't really that enthused to hear science jokes when they're about to have a night on the town. I remember one time I was in this obscure gig that was at a seafood restaurant turned comedy club. Yes, that is a thing. And people were so rowdy because it was their Friday night. And I went up there and I said, as cheerily as I could, I said, "Who likes science?" And there was this one guy in the front row who said, "Do we look like a crowd that likes science?" And I was like, what did I get myself into? But during the daytime, I actually work as a science writer at NASA, and my job is to help communicate science to the general public, make it more understandable for them. So I saw this and I took the challenge. Okay, sir, I get why you don't like science. It can be overwhelming and you don't know what is true. But my job as a science writer is to help distinguish the difference between fact versus myth. Fact: you can get chlamydia if a koala scratches you. Myth: your wife will believe you. Some men were clapping too hard at that. This is actually my most successful science joke. It has a short premise, and it produces about 7.5 seconds of laughter on average. Now, I did not go up to every single person in that audience at every performance and say, "Hey, why did you laugh at that joke?" I am not that desperate yet. But I had to go back and I decided to look at my comedy notebooks and say, why did I decide to write this joke? What was my intended takeaway for the audience? Well, I wanted to present science information from a new perspective. I wanted to sneak attack the audience with science. If I can use comedy to draw you in, then yeah, I'll slide in a science fact or two. I know what you're thinking. People want to go to a comedy club, not a lecture. But I actually think the emphasis of truth in my jokes actually makes my comedy more special and memorable. And I think it's because science and comedy are kind of an odd couple, right? We trust scientists. The Pew Research Center did a survey that said public confidence in scientists is actually high compared to other groups. And then on the other hand, you have comedians who are known for stretching the truth to get a laugh. Think about Rodney Dangerfield. Now, when you combine these two things, though, I think they actually have a lot of traits that can help each other out. Science is about the discovery of truth, and my comedy is about communicating that truth while entertaining. I read about a recent research project where these students actually created this condom that can detect an STD. It's actually coated with antibodies, so when it comes into contact with an STD, it actually glows a different color. So if it's green, it might be herpes. If it's yellow, it might be chlamydia. If it's blue, it might be on too tight. So many people Google that premise and then come up to me afterwards and say, Kasha, your joke was correct. And I think that's great. If I can entertain and inform you, that's great. But if I can motivate you to look up something that I said later, I feel like that's a win for the science field. Now, I never intended to use science in comedy. When I show people my charts and my Excel sheets, people say, oh, you're doing the science of science comedy. And even though I'm not a practicing scientist, I realize that I am using a lot of the critical thinking skills that I used when I was a chemistry student. When I write a joke, I write the premise, and then I have all these different punchlines. When I go up on stage, I take that premise and I try out the different punchlines to see which one does the best. It actually isn't that different from when I conducted research as a chemistry student. I was trying to make this compound that was soluble in the human body so that it could deliver medicine. So I had this metal backbone, and I had all these different compounds, and I was trying to see which one would successfully bind. My joke premise is this metal backbone, and the compounds are all the different punchlines. This is how I convinced my parents I'm still doing science, so just give it to me. Now, the point of my talk is not to make everyone a science comedian. This journey was here to show you how I use comedy to make sometimes inaccessible parts of the world a little more accessible for people sometimes. But even more so than that, I gained this insight by combining these two pretty different fields, science and comedy. And, really everyone has at least two things they're good at or an expert in. Finding a way to combine your passions can lead to a unique path and help you find the most authentic version of yourself. I combined science and comedy and found my preferred method of science communication and how I can be a science comedian. Find yours. Thank you.